Sure. Oops. There we go. Oh crap. There we go.
There are so many video game genres out there, like completely different types and styles of games with their own fandoms, but unfortunately, some of those fade away over time thanks to the ever-shifting cultural landscape that is gaming, I guess. So we've got 10 genres that have kind of vanished. Not completely, you know, there's always an indie developer that'll make a cool nostalgic version or things here and there, but still, we've got 10 genres that aren't quite as big as they used to be. So let's get started off with number 10. When you're talking about platformers, there's a hard line between two separate camps. You know, your regular platformers like Mario, Sonic, and of course, everybody's favorite Bubsy. And then there's the cinematic platformer. Instead of having a freewheeling relationship,
Oops, my bad. Just wanted to pause to say Bubsy. That was one of the worst games ever made, so no.
with physics like those previous games, the cinematic platformer attempts to create a more realistic experience by limiting the sorts of things you could do to something that approximates the real world a little bit. You know, these games are more like puzzle games where getting around the environment itself is often the riddle that needs to be solved. I'm talking about games like Prince of Persia, Flashback, even the original Tomb Raider games to an extent. If movement feels stiff and awkward, then you've...
That was the first platformer I ever played. I got pretty sure was the original Tomb Raiders.
You've probably got a more cinematic style platformer on your hands.
That's what we had back in the day.
That has to be the primary reason this genre kind of died out. They were often more frustrating than fun to play and practice. These days, many games contain the DNA of a cinematic platformer. I mean, the Assassin's Creed series is all built off of what kind of the Prince of Persia games did. The rebooted Tomb Raider games still have a strong platforming focus. You're still climbing in these games. The reason this one is at the top of the list is that
love the new Tomb Raider games. Love them. Give us more.
Well, you know, the genre isn't completely dead yet. It's on life support for sure, but it's not entirely dead. There are still games coming out that kind of keep this game's spark alive, like, say, Little Nightmares, the recent Deliver Us Mars, and one of the biggest games from 2022, Stray, you can argue is kind of in this genre. Now, the platforming part of the genre may have slowed down, but the cinematic part has only gotten bigger and bigger. Pretty much every major AAA single-player big game that has any form of jumping in it owes something to what a lot of us called that cinematic platformer genre. These games may be tough to go back to, but they're an important step in the development of the industry as a whole, if you ask us. Next, over at number 9, let's talk about like the old school real-time strategy games. You know, we still get a new game every once in a while. Like
StarCraft was the first PC game I think I ever played. And I really got into StarCraft, and like Age of Empires and all these types of games.
Age of Empires 4 and Company of Heroes 3.
Warcraft,
the genre is nowhere near as big as it used to be. For about 10 years, from the mid-90s to the mid-2000s, the RTS genre absolutely ruled the PC gaming market. I'm talking about Command and Conquer, talking Warcraft, StarCraft, Age of Empires, Warhammer, Dawn of War. There were a lot of RTS games, and people couldn't get enough of them. There was a point, too, where like we had plenty of licensed games, but in the PC world, it was like every big IP also had a licensed RTS game. These games were all about building up a base, constructing units, and then sending them out to destroy your enemies. Like, keyboard and mouse are basically required.
Yeah, it made you feel like a god, though, because you were commanding whole groups of people and sending them to fight and destroy stuff. I remember I used to love just building up huge armies and then just going and wiping out the whole map at once.
To keep up with all the complex commands and things and shortcuts needed to really keep everything going. And while there have been some valiant attempts to bring the RTS genre to consoles, it never really completely took off. You've got to remember that for a while there, RTS games were big money. StarCraft was esports for a while there, but for whatever reason, player interest slowly kind of waned and the genre went into a pretty sudden decline. Some people will speculate that part of it can be blamed on the popularity of like Dota likes, but for us at least, it seems like the genre failed to evolve and kind of change with the times. I guess the formula got stale for some people, so maybe they just moved on. Like the previous entry, and like I said earlier, the genre isn't completely dead yet. I mean, we're still getting the odd RTS every now and then, like the recent Company of Heroes 3 was pretty good, and indie developers are still making these things every once in a while, and they're doing a pretty good job. But these games have nowhere near that massive market share that they used to. Next, over at number 8, let's talk collect-athons. Let's just say up front that for this one, we want to make it clear that like we're not talking about 3D platformers here. You know, if anything, 3D platformers are getting a bit of a resurgence with games like Psychonauts 2, Crash Bandicoot 4, and Kirby and the Forgotten Land.
But
and
Crash Bandicoot 4 is so exhausting too.
For this one specifically, we're talking about the collect.
I haven't even done it.
That relatively small band of games where collecting stuff was the gameplay. Like I'm talking about Super Mario 64, the Banjo-Kazooie games, the Spyro games, the first Jak and Daxter kinda, and of course, Donkey Kong 64. Now, in these games, your primary goal is to just run around large open environments and pick stuff up. Usually, that stuff you pick up can be used to unlock new levels where you can pick up even more stuff. Sometimes you have to pick up things to unlock new abilities that let you pick up even more stuff. If you have enough stuff by the end of the game, then you can fight the final boss and probably get a cutscene telling you to get more stuff if you didn't get everything. It's just a lot of sitting around figuring out how you can get to that place to pick up more stuff. To say that these games can be a little exhausting is an understatement. There's a reason so many modern platformers have kind of ditched some of the collect-a-thon aspects of the genre. Now, the thing with these games is that there's like a balancing act where the act of collecting can be fun without feeling like you're doing chores. The original Banjo really pulled it off. Mario 64 is a classic for a reason. These games nail it. For a lot of people, Donkey Kong 64 is where the collecting gets a little out of control. There's just so much to pick up in that game that you kind of feel like you're just a janitor more than a hero doing cool adventures. At least once you stop and think about it as an adult. After these games we mentioned, the genre felt like it was kind of in decline after that, as most of the games that were collection focused moved away from that onto other genres. So while it is mostly a dead genre, we still get a new game every once in a while. Like Yooka-Laylee wasn't great. Hat in Time was pretty excellent, and the recent SpongeBob and the Cosmic Shake is about as unabashedly old school as one of these games can really get. So there are a few of these things still out there. Of course, you could also play pretty much any open world game in existence. You can argue that these games are kind of the evolution of a collect-a-thon, for better or worse. True. Now over at number 7, man, with the overall kind of death of arcades, so too came the death of the light gun shooter. If you spent any time in an arcade in the 90s or early...
Yeah, I used to love light gun shooters in the arcade. Time Crisis games. I used to go to the local arcades just to play that and like that. Well, that and Marvel vs. Capcom 2, but mainly Time Crisis, and I still love those. The only problem was on home consoles, those games were the worst fucking thing, and the guns were, you know, the biggest problem. They never read properly. It was just awful. I remember buying one and the same day taking it back because the guns were shit.
Early 2000s, you know what we're talking about here. The big flashy game cabinets where you blast away at enemies with an oversized plastic gun.
Oh, I don't know. Yep, there's Time Crisis. That's Time Crisis right there. There was one where... a Jurassic Park one where you sat and like what was supposed to be the Jeep and you were shooting. That one was really fun and cool.
These things
hard as hell.
Awesome, especially
but they
the Time Crisis games that incorporated force feedback into the gun. So every time you fired, there was actually like some kickback on top of a pedal that also let you duck behind cover whenever you pressed it. Anytime we went to arcades, those were the machines.
I would love to have one of the Time Crisis games in my house, like in my basement, the actual pedal one, because I loved the pedal. I thought that was so much fun to use and made it so much like strategic. I don't know, but yeah, Halo Fireteam. Oh yeah, I do remember this. I never got to play that.
We would hit up first. Area 51 was another classic, albeit a little bit more rudimentary and old school. Your goal was to blast aliens while avoiding the civilians. That was a common obstacle in these games where innocent people would just pop up on the screen and go, "Oh no!" And if you shot them, you'd take damage or be penalized. Now, as the first-person shooter genre got bigger, the demand for these kind of on-rails action games kind of declined. We still got some fun stuff like those two Resident Evil shooters on the Wii.
Yep, that's Survivor. That look familiar, guys.
Extraction, but
it's Extraction is after 3, I think. Wait, I think that might be when 8 is trying to escape Raccoon City after the events of 2. But apparently, I did not know they made a Zero. My bad, Resident Evil 0 light gun shooter game. I would love to own that as well. But yeah, twitch.tv/3alivegaming, where we're trying to go through all
these games are mostly gone these days.
The Resident Evil games.
The most you'll really get now is the random VR game, which is cool, but it's not quite the same as having an actual weighted plastic gun in your hand. They're more immersive overall, but the arcade experience.
Yeah, I wonder why they got rid of that.
Next, over at number 6, let's talk music and rhythm games. But we have to be specific. Like a lot of genres we've listed so far, these types of games aren't literally dead. If you're really looking, there are some pretty great music games out there, especially coming out of Japan. But compared to the explosive popularity they enjoyed in the 2000s, a lot of these games might as well not exist. And like the popularity basically came from two games: Guitar Hero and, of course, Rock Band. It cannot be understated just how big these games were for a while. They were absolutely massive. Both Activision with Guitar Hero and later EA with Rock Band, they knew they had a golden goose on their hands.
If you got real big into Guitar Hero and Rock Band, why? Just why? Like, it was the same shit every fucking year, just every 6 months to a year, and every 6 months to a year, people would lose their shit at my school about these games coming out, and it's the same thing. You're just playing I don't know. I never liked these games, and then it's just always the same patterns reused over and over for every fucking game.
And so they proceeded to
sped
milk
up
them
or slowed
for
down.
all that they were worth. I guess
yeah,
with
they
this,
did.
People just got burned out. The amount of Guitar Hero sequels and
After
spin-offs
like 5
was
years.
Ridiculous. The fact that the games were basically unchanged from Guitar Hero 1 was kind of an issue too. Like, they did little change-ups, but I guess not enough. There's only so many ways someone can play the same game over and over before the experience gets stale, and I guess that's what happens. Seems like most of the mainstream folks just got tired of it and moved on. Music games are still around today, of course, like we said. Rhythm games are still a thing. The Just Dance games are inexplicably still releasing and are constantly making the top 10 in sales for any given year. And of course, the recent Theater Rhythm Final Fantasy game is a top-notch collection of songs from that series. So there's still interest in music games in general, but you know, as a genre, especially with plastic peripherals, it is nowhere near.
Yeah, thank God those
Next,
things
over
are
at number
gone.
5, let's talk vehicular combat games, because now we're.
How many of you have a bunch of those things lying around in your basements or in your house somewhere? Because yeah, every time you had to buy a new one, it came with a new fucking guitar and then drum set and then bass. It was just ridiculous.
Really getting into the real dead stuff. Even the most obscure genre of game gets a few indies out on Steam these days, but not so much with vehicular combat games. There's not a lot. There's Road Redemption, which came out a few years back, and that's really it for right now. Now, during the PS1-ish era, these games were huge. Twisted Metal was the big one, but Vigilante 8 was another really underrated one. And then there were like all these copycats.
That just came up on the channel a few weeks ago. Hell no. Never seen that before.
Star Wars had one. There was a wrestling one. The Simpsons had one. And they all had one thing in common. A lot of them really sucked. Really, it was Twisted Metal and Vigilante 8, and those were the GOATs. Really, as much of us weirdos really worshipped Vigilante 8, it was Twisted Metal as the big mainstream one, and nothing really else. So when that series ended, so did the entire car combat genre. There are plenty of games that are kind of sort of related to this genre, but for the most part, it's pretty dead and buried. Maybe if Sony ever revives Twisted Metal again, it'll happen, but at least right now, it seems unlikely. There's still that TV show that's meant to come out this year for Twisted Metal. So seriously, that's still happening. And then there was also that PlayStation 5 vehicular combat game that didn't last very long, but you know, that's really it. And you know what? It's a damn shame because vehicular combat is fun. Now, over at number 4, let's talk arena shooters, because back in the day, these shooters were lightning fast and uncomplicated. Keyboards were basically required, and
yep, and it was like, what was it, RTSs, and then this were the king of PC games, Quake.
The skill ceiling was so
Unreal Tournament.
Call of Duty and
Unreal
Halo
Tournament used to be the
games
shit.
More palpable to a wider mainstream audience.
Was
there were
Halo
games like
before
Quake,
Halo.
Quake 3, Unreal Tournament. Now, these games are some of the best multiplayer games out there, but feel almost alien these days because they lack almost everything people have come to expect from a multiplayer shooter. There's no progression track, no loot boxes, no battle passes, no monetization, or real progression of any kind other than the cost of the game itself, and then you just shoot and you play and that's it. There wasn't really leveling up or anything. It was just practicing and getting better. That was the leveling up. So many popular modern shooters borrow from the arena shooter with their mechanics and movements, but it's never quite the same. What makes an arena shooter stand out is how everyone is on the same level. There are no loadouts. Everything you have to just pick up on the map, which makes learning the levels absolutely essential to being good in this. Because everything is collected in the maps, there's little room for weapon skins or unlockables. Like, none of that stuff matters. It could probably still be done, but for whatever reason, these games just aren't popular anymore. Developers keep trying to come out with new ones, and they always fail or have a very small player base. Like, look at any of the more recent attempts at reviving, you know, the arena shooter, like, say, Lawbreakers or Quake Champions or a couple others. All of these games.
What about the one that had, like, all the teleporting? That the only problem was it was just run by, like, too small of a team that didn't have the money to keep it going. God damn it. Why can't I remember the name of that? I think it was Splitgate. Yeah, that was a pretty successful one for a little bit. So successful that they couldn't keep it going, as a matter of fact.
Solid, but the player base just never really was quite there. Next, over at number 3, let's talk extreme sports games. This is another one of those genres that was absolutely massive during the 90s and the 2000s, but it died off hard after that. And for pretty much the same reason that killed rhythm games. You know, for those, it was Guitar Hero that kind of killed, like, the plastic peripheral rhythm genre thing. Well, for this one, I guess it was Tony Hawk. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 was a massive hit, and the franchise kept going strong for a while, at least until kind of the Xbox 360 era. During the PS1, PS2 era of the games, though, it seemed like every other game coming out for consoles was an extreme sport.
That might be getting a remake or be getting brought back real soon. With another game.
All with some other sports personality, like Dave Mirra BMX or Kelly Slater's Pro Surfer. The genre was so saturated that games had to start getting weird to stand out, like Toxic Grind or Dark Summit, a snowboarding game about, like, a dystopian mountain or something.
Yeah, I remember seeing this in magazines. I never got to play it, unfortunately. But yeah, you play as her right there. And I wasn't she like an undercover detective or something? But her big thing was she was, like, also, I think, a pro snowboarder or something. So a lot of the game had you snowboarding through stuff, as well as, like, some action and stealth. And then I think obviously, since no one remembers it outside of this, you know, this right here,
it was to the point where, like, EA even had their own special offshoot label for these crazy extreme sports games. There were so many awesome ones in this genre. It's almost impossible to talk about them all here, man. Tony Hawk was the king, of course, but the skate games, SSX Tricky, 1080 snowboarding, Jet Set Radio, aggressive inline, like, we just can keep going. All amazing. And it's a shame that these days that genre is mostly dead. You know, a genre has really vanished when attempts at a revival come out.
There's the one that killed it right there.
Kind of ignored. I mean, remember Riders Republic? Yeah, I mean, you probably don't remember it. We really liked it, but it didn't really catch on. At least everyone rightfully loved the Tony Hawk 1 and 2 remake, but at this point, it's hard to say if we'll ever see a real resurgence of this genre or not, and it's a bummer. Next, over at number 2, let's talk movie tie-in games. I guess with these, they're just too expensive. Game production is too volatile, and it's not worth the effort for them. It's just easier to make cheap phone game tie-ins rather than actual full console releases. For the blockbuster generation of gamers, there was no genre of game more equally loved and despised as the movie tie-in game. These days, video games don't need movies to be successful.
Yeah, that's exactly why it died out, was because back in the late 90s, early 2000s, every movie tie-in game was so bad, no one would even fucking rent it because we all knew it was trash and no one put any work or effort into it. Now, this is changing. I'll probably bring it up at the end of this. This is changing. Like, we have the Spider-Man games. We have the Arkham games. Well, I guess those aren't movie tie-ins. Fuck, damn, he does have a good point. Never mind. Ignore that part.
They can be their own thing, free of ridiculous release dates and directives from clueless movie studio executives who have no idea what actually makes a good game. But in the 80s and 90s and through most of the 2000s, I think, like, if there was a big movie coming out, then it was likely that there would be some kind of movie tie-in game, even if it sometimes didn't make too much sense. Sometimes they were good, like most of the Disney games on the SNES or Genesis, or the Lord of the Rings beat-em-ups, or
those were actually good.
Escape from Butcher Bay, the Spider-Man movie games. And then, like, sometimes they were really terrible, like basically all the other ones, a really long list. For most people, movie tie-ins were synonymous with shovelware. You know, a lot of them were crappy games rushed.
If this is the Fast and Furious game, this was recent though, so this doesn't get a pass. This was very recent. This was just a lazy cash cash grab of a game.
Down earlier to meet a release date.
Fuck this
They
game.
were made to fulfill a contract, not make something legitimately great or memorable. The fact that there were some good ones, like, I don't know, GoldenEye, was the exception rather than the rule, and that's probably the biggest reason why movie tie-ins mostly died out, along with Activision realizing it can make way more money from its original properties while at the same time not really having to split the earnings with a movie studio. Now down to number 1, let's talk toys to life games. You know, stuff like Lego Dimensions, Disney Infinity, Skylanders, even Amiibos technically aren't like popping off like they used to, but that's kind of a side. Now back in 2011, Activision kind of popularized this brilliant idea of microtransaction, but real. It's a great idea on paper, actually. You sell toys, which have these RFID tags in the base, which when scanned, will make it so your toy will appear as a character in the game. This all came about right as the great peripheral boom was starting to wane. People were putting away their steering wheels and their Rock Band drum sets and their Guitar Hero guitars we talked about earlier, so Activision wanted something else that would encourage kids to get a lot of additional plastic stuff on top of buying a $60 game, and this is what they came up with. Skylanders ended up being a massive success, at least for a while, and then the copycats soon followed. There was Disney Infinity, Lego Dimensions, and a lot of smaller and mid-tier ones that just never really got anywhere, not barely even got out of the gate. It seems like these toys to life games were the future of the industry for a while, but only after a few years, that money spigot dried up. Only the Amiibos are left standing. Even if like we're not buying as many, there's only a couple releases a year here and there. Now, it was just way too much, way too fast. The basic idea of a toy line that's integrated with video games isn't a bad one. It sounds better than your average NFT. But as the video game industry tends to do, like they went way overboard with the monetization and made everyone sick of it real quick. But hey, those are 10 genres that are pretty much either dead or disappearing. It was fun to talk about this, but also extremely
some for the
painful.
best.
A lot of this stuff is a fun trip down memory lane. So we want to hear some of your memories of these genres. You're probably going to want to defend some of them. You know, like some of these aren't totally dead. So if there's one game still keeping you around, let us know. We love a recommendation. But if you like talking games with us every single day where we upload, clicking the like button helps us out. That's all you gotta do.
I don't think so.
But as always, thanks for watching.
I don't think so, but yep. Yeah, it's just the passage of time in gaming. Gotta figure out what works, what doesn't work, and some things work for a short amount of time. Some things don't. Whoops, no, I did not want to do that. I was trying to see the other games that were featured in here. Yep, great video though, yeah. But yeah, some of these are gone for the better. Some of these we don't really need anymore. Like the movie tie-in games I think could have the possibility of coming back. It's just, it would need a lot of coordination on the studio's part and the gaming developer, you know, all the companies making the game, because there were like, I remember there were times like movie tie-in video games came out like months after the movie actually did because of issues and whatnot. I think I remember that correctly, but yeah.